right, good evening, friends. So go ahead and write down your date, 2017, your title, equivalent fractions, and your learning goal. I can use strategies to determine if fractions are equivalent or to find equivalent fractions. Pause your video, press play when you're ready to begin again. All right, we have already talked about equivalent fractions, and equivalent fractions are fractions that have different numerators and denominators but are worth the same amount. Fractions with different numerators and denominators that are worth the same amount. Go ahead and get that copied down. Press play when you're ready to begin again. All right, so today we're going to talk about a couple of different strategies that we can use to determine if fractions are equivalent. And we're going to use 3 fractions throughout each of our strategies. So after the first strategy, you'll know which one is equivalent and which one is not. But we're going to use these same 3 fractions, 3/4, 6/8, and 5/7, to determine which fractions are equivalent to each other and which fraction is not equivalent to the other 2. The first strategy that we're going to look at is to draw a picture. This is my least favorite strategy because we are not all perfect artists, Ms. Pickrell especially. And if we are not absolutely drawing our pictures perfectly, we can make a mistake. And I'm getting ready to show you that. So I went ahead and drew my first 3 fractions, 3/4, 6/8, and 5/7. I remembered that my denominator told me what I split my shape into, how many pieces I split it into. So 3/4, I'm going to shade 3 of my 4 pieces. All right, I just kind of did out a little quick dirty drawing. Now I'm going to shade in 6 of my 8 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And if you look at these 2 drawings, you can see that 3/4 and 6/8 are equivalent to each other. They are worth the same amount. They are both missing this little chunk right here. Now I have 5/7. 5/7 is not as easy to draw, and you can see that my triangles are not all the same size. This is where drawing a picture gets tricky. So because I am not the perfect artist, we're going to run into a little bit of trouble here. So it was really easy to see that these were equivalent. Now we're going to try to see if we can tell if 5/7 is equivalent as well. 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now if you were to look at this, you might say, oh yeah, they're equivalent. Well, they are actually not. They are not equivalent to each other. And that is where you get into a little bit of trouble drawing pictures. However, it is a good fallback plan, or it's always a good way to check your work, etc. Pause your video, press play when you're ready to begin again. All right, my next strategy is what you do to the top, you do to the bottom. So we talked about this today in class. If you multiply the top by 2, you have to be able to multiply the bottom by 2. And if you can't do what you did to the top, what you do to the bottom, then they are not equivalent. So if we look here, we can say, okay, I can get from 3 to 6 by multiplying by 2. If I can get to 3 to 6 by multiplying by 2, I better be able to get from 4 to 8 by multiplying by 2. If I can't, they're not equivalent. Oh, I can. So these 2 are equal to each other. All right. Over here, we say, well, how do I get from 6 to 3? Oh, well, I divide by 2. I should also be able to divide my bottom by 2. And I can, so they are equal. And when we're talking about what we do to the top, we do to the bottom, we're talking only about multiplying and dividing. So only multiplying and dividing, not adding and subtracting, only multiplication and division. All right, well, how do I get from 3 to 5? I can't multiply by anything, and I can't divide by anything. If I can't multiply to get from 3 to 5, and I can't divide to get from 3 to 5, then these must not be equivalent. They are not equal to each other. Same thing over here. How can I get from 6 to 5 by multiplying and dividing? I can't. And I can't get from 8 to 7 by multiplying and dividing, so they are not equal to each other. They're only equivalent if you can do to the top what you did to the bottom. So these are not equivalent. Pause your video, press play when you're ready to begin. All right, this is a strategy that we're going to look at together in class tomorrow to understand why it works, but I wanted to go ahead and show it to you. So cross multiplying is another strategy that you can use. We'll also use this strategy when we are comparing fractions to see which fraction is larger or which fraction is smaller. But in cross multiplying, what you do is you take your bottom number of one fraction and multiply the top of the other. So 4 times 6. Well, 4 times 6 is 24. And I circle it. You do the same. Bottom to top, 8 times 3 is 24. Because both of my multiplied numbers are 24, these are equivalent. They are equivalent. Now, if we're going to look at 3/4 to 5/7 to see if these are equivalent, we would say 4 times 5 is 20, and 3 times 7 is 21. 21 and 20 are not the same number, so they are not equivalent to each other. They are not equivalent. And let's look at 6/8 to 5/7. Well, 8 times 5 is 40, and 7 times 6 is 42. 40 and 42 are not equivalent. The only fractions that were equivalent to each other were 3/4 and 6/8. And again, we're going to look at that tomorrow and talk more about why that works. But that is going to be a really important strategy for you moving forward. Press play when you're ready to begin again. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is simplifying fractions, and this is going to be really important because oftentimes you're going to be asked what the answer is in simplest form. Well, simplest form or simplest fraction or simplified fraction is an equivalent fraction that's expressed in its smallest form. So here I have the fraction 8/16, and a lot of you off the bat probably already know what this equivalent fraction is simplified, but let's talk through it. So 8/16 can be simplified. It can be made smaller. Well, I can go ahead and say 8 and 16. I know that 2 goes into both of those numbers. So I could divide my top and my bottom by 2. And remember, if I do the same to the top and bottom, then I'm going to end up with an equivalent fraction. And that gets me 8 divided by 2 is 4. And 16 divided by 2 is 8. 4/8. Well, 4/8 is smaller than 8/16, but they're equivalent fractions. However, I know that I can actually make 8/16 or 4/8 smaller because I know that 2 also goes into 4 and it also goes into 8. Well, 4 divided by 2 is 2 and 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 8/16 is equal to 4/8 is equal to 2/4, but I also know I can get it even smaller. 2 divided by 2 and 4 divided by 2 gets me 1/2. This fraction cannot get any smaller. There is not anything that can go into that fraction to make it any smaller. So 1/2 is the simplified fraction of 8/16. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about one step that we could have done to do this just once so that we didn't have to do divided by 2, divided by 2, divided by 2. See if you can figure that out tonight on your own, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Have a great night.